Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about 10 underrated RPGs, some not even rated at all. However, I'll explain for whom I recommend these games as they can be a bit gimmicky, and there is no particular order in this list. Without further ado, let's begin. In the first entry we have Ys 9, Monstro, available for the Switch, PS4, PS5 and Steam. This one is perhaps stretching a bit because it was well received, however I will debate that it is a bit underrated because it is not good looking, which I would recommend avoid the Switch version if you don't want drops. However, if I consider that aside, this game has a solid story with interesting plot and chaotic gameplay for those who like fast-paced hack-and-slash games. At first, it is a bit simple in its level design, but once you start unlocking the other characters, you will be able to explore other areas and of course get into really convoluted fights. Also highly recommended for those who believe they can conquer the highest difficulty in an action game. In the second entry we have Dra Tactics, released for the DS. This game follows the story of Tsubasa and Yamato, two children who are into bugs, where they are transported into another world to save it from the Black Swarm. I wouldn't say that its story is that great. Quite entertaining though, but a bit predictable in some moments. This one is not even rated, and some of me thought it was well known back in the day because I used to play it with other friends. However, this one went under the radar. While its story is not that engaging, its gameplay is great for a strategic RPG, where it becomes way better once you are able to use cards to improve damage, defense, and so on, as they have minigames like fast tapping the screen, avoid getting hit, something like a guacamole, and stuff like that, where you specialize these runs by increasing their melee, gun, or long-range capabilities. It lasts for around 40 hours if you just want to finish its main story, but you can add something like 10-20 hours in the post-content. In the third entry we have EVE Online. You can play it in Windows, Mac and Linux. This game has been running since 2003, and when I saw the ratings I didn't believe it. This of course is going to depend from different releases. Really cool story if you are into sci-fi. However, I would only recommend this game for those who are into really technical gameplay, because the learning curve of this game is brutal. Reason why it has a terrible retention. Also because people want to jump into the game and start doing crazy things. But look at it in the next way. It is like a Second Life, where with a bit of luck and wise choices you can pay your account without investing too much time into it. Of course that sounds simple, but it takes time to properly understand all its small mechanics, like what are the differences between destroyers, cruisers, battleships and so on. Do I use turrets? If that is the case, which system? Projectiles, lasers, rails or hybrid? What kind of tank do I use? Etc, etc, etc. So you can get real lost if you do not have a bit of direction among its countless activities. But once you get some of these things at some degree, this game it's a lot of fun. In the next entry we have Nights in the Nightmare, released for the DS, PSP, and if you know Japanese, you can get the remastered version for the Switch. This game narrates the story of a king that was murdered, and now that Wisp wanders recollecting the souls of knights that also were beaten at some point in their lives. Its story goes in a so-so tone for the most part. I found it entertaining, but most of it's a lot of text. Quite underrated. It is a game that I recommend for those who are into convoluted game mechanics, because to properly play this game you need to jump into its tutorial section, which can be a bit intimidating, and then into its tip section. But once you get some basic things here and there, it is a strategy chess bullet hell where the idea of the game is that you cannot recover the HP of any character. Using special moves uses a bit of their life, so you need to recruit other units as you advance to then fuse their souls and get stronger units, where depending from their class they are able to move into specific directions or just use special moves with a lot of range. Quite hard once you get into boss fights, but also quite addictive if you are into bullet hells. Personally, the version I recommend is the DS, because it is a bit easier while using the stylus, but try to get a nice protection, otherwise you'll see scratches all over the place. For the fifth entry we have Demon Gaze, found on the Switch, Vita, Steam and PS4. This game narrates the story of a particular character that was born in an unknown way, but he is able to use his eye to capture demons, a skill that will eventually lead into some messy situations. Story-wise, this game is a bit mixed between silly and entertaining moments, with also fan service, so keep that in mind. I consider that it is a bit underrated and overlooked by many, despite its success for a company that is quite niche. I've seen that oftentimes people refer to it as generic, as they do not have the chance to have a secondary class, but this game addresses that in a peculiar way. Where you begin creating some characters, once jumping into the dungeons, the idea is to find the circles where you place different gems, to get items as loot. Perhaps a bit simple in its idea, but it gets much more interesting once you are able to farm skills. That way you can start adding skills from other classes to further specialize each unit. If there is something I love about this game, is that each boss is something to behold. At first they are not that hard, but if you rush through the game without considering equipment and some useful skills, there are some enemies that can become a lot of work if you do not have a solid strategy. Far from your old RPGs, but a bit gimmicky as you approach the ending and its post-content. In the next entry we have Robocalypse. You can find it for the DS and iOS, where whatever the heck the writers were puffing, it had to be good, because the idea is that robots start attacking a factory, named Thermidum, and this pretty much leads to world annihilation. However, Myron Mako decided to use veterans of World War II as template to make a brigade of soldiers as countermeasure. And well, this story is a parody over another parody where the ending is something that I prefer to leave as dumb but funny. This game is terribly underrated. However, I would only recommend it for those who are into real-time strategy games like StarCraft, way smaller scale, but I hope you get the idea. So here you get resources and energy to build installations, robots, defensive turrets, heroes, and so on. For the most part, I will say it is a lot of fun, where you tackle different chapters with some classic ideas as conquest, reach a particular point, or destroy particular assets. If there is something a bit lacking, it's the general difficulty, at least if you're into hardcore RTS games. Aside from that, definitely recommended for silly playing sessions or play with friends. Those battles can be extraordinary. For the 7th entry, another RTS, Tom Clancy's End War, found on the PS3, 360 and Steam. Just stay away from the DS and PSP because they are similar to Advance Wars. This game has a straightforward story. Resources are limited. Different governments agree on an apparent end of nuclear war, but man, none of that exists, and Europe, Russia and USA decide to beat the heck out of each other, after USA tried to launch the Freedom Star to have a tactical advantage over other nations. This one is slightly underrated, but I get it as the game has some annoying bugs where sometimes the audio and visuals get messed up. But getting past those details, the gameplay revolves around choosing an army, where USA is balanced with the secondary equipment, Russia packs a punch but it is slow, and Europe with fast units and strong shields. Here you need to adapt on the go as these battles can change real fast from one second to another, because once you reach a specific point in the battle, the losing side gets the chance to use a WMD, that it's pretty much able to wipe out all your units. This can turn into sour situations because ideally you want all your units to stay alive as they level up, and that gives them the chance to use all the cool equipment. In the 8th entry we have DeEnd Request, found on the Switch, PS4 and Steam. Here we follow the story of Arata, a video game programmer who lost contact with his co-worker Sheena. They were developing a game named World's Odyssey, game never completed. But in an unexpected turn of events, Arata receives an email from Sheena 1 year later after she vanished, where Arata finds that Sheena is within the game. Now, I wouldn't recommend this game for those who cannot stand fan service and some silly moments. Nonetheless, this story is extraordinary. While I had a particular idea, later down the line the game hits completely different, with an amazing narrative about other worlds, narrative that is expanded in DeEnd 2. For me, this game is terribly underrated. For the most part, I will say it is because of its fan service and silly ideas, along its clunky gameplay, where you play in a kind of pool mechanic, where ideally you attack the enemies to make them bounce against each other or allies. The beginning of the game is rather slow, but somewhere at the middle of it, I was having a lot of fun with some bosses and level design. There are some other mechanics in this combat, but to be honest, I never really tried them. For me, this story alone was definitely worth it. For the 9th entry, 7 Dragon 3 Code BFD, found on the 3DS. This game follows the after events of 2 prior games, where the company Nodan's objective is to stop the reborn of the 7th Dragon to save humanity. This game's story can be a bit gimmicky to understand at some points because there are several references left on the previous games. However, some of those details can be overlooked. This game is much more known compared when it first came out, but I still consider it is a bit unknown and underrated. It's a dungeon crawler where you create different units using some creative classes. For the most part, I will say it is easy if you take your time to understand these units and start synergizing their skills to beat the dragons, which are the main dish of the game. And there are interesting turns once you can assemble your second and third squad, because you will need them throughout the story, so you cannot really slack on any of these units. Of course, I consider that this adds a particular complexity that I liked a lot, and if you want to dive deeper, it's post-content, it's quite brutal, because you will see tons of dragons as normal enemies. And last but not least, Skelter 2, found on Steam, Switch and PS4. However, seems like the Steam version has a lot of issues, so keep that in mind. This is another extraordinary story if you take out of the equation the fanservice or silly moments, if you are not into that. Here we follow Otsu and Little Mermaid, where they get their destined meet with Jack and Alice. Unfortunately, this wouldn't go that well after finding a nightmare, separating the team, where Jack gets injured and in that last breath he turns into another nightmare, barely able to keep his senses. But why do I consider this as a fantastic story? Because the writers of this one said F to the classic JRPG ending. This group will learn what suffering means, and from that point onwards it's just a struggle to reach their freedom that it's never achieved. I would recommend at the very least this story, because it is not as long as Finale or hard as Nightmares, and also it's the beginning of this whole mess. It's quite underrated in my opinion. Gameplay wise, you can play with 6 characters being able to unlock different jobs and combine the skills among this system, being able to get particular units where you either give secondary roles or specialize for a job. Compared with all the RPGs, this one has but one kinda hard boss, which is the last one. What is cool is that there is no need to farm in this game, if you use all the assets given to you in a wise way. And that's all folks, I hope you found this list informative, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.